The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The street lamp at the end of Privet Drive flickered once. It did not flicker again. It simply dimmed, the way a candle dims when something large and cold passes close to the flame, and then held, casting orange light over a road so perfectly ordinary that the night itself seemed reluctant to disturb it. Cookie-cutter houses, closed curtains, a tabby cat on a garden wall watching. Then Albus Dumbledore materialized at the far end of the road. He did not apparate with the crack that most wizards made. He arrived the way very old, very powerful things arrive, with a displacement of air so quiet it registered as pressure behind the ears, a sense that the world had simply rearranged itself slightly, and here he was. He was carrying 2 bundles against his chest, one in each arm wrapped against the cold. He looked down at them both. Then he began to walk. His footsteps made no sound on the pavement. This was not a spell. This was the particular quiet of a man who understood, down to his bones, what he was about to do and what it would cost. He stopped at the end of the front path of number 4. He shifted one bundle to the crook of his left arm, reached into his robes and produced a quill, the parchment he had been writing on all evening since the ruins of the Potter cottage, standing in the cold and the smoke with a baby in his arms who should not have survived. He had written in the leaky cauldron by wandlight. He had written on a train platform bench with 2 infants asleep in transfigured baskets beside him, bent over parchment while commuters who would never understand anything about his world stepped around him without seeing. He wrote the final line now, standing on this garden path. They must both believe this is home, Petunia. Without that belief, neither of them is safe, and everything Lily built to protect them will crumble before morning. He folded the parchment. He pressed the Gringotts seal to the base of it. Not the Hogwarts seal, not his own, and held it there until the wax cooled. Then he set the bundles down on the doorstep, side by side, with the particular care of a man handling everything that remains of 2 families. He looked at them for a moment. Harry Potter, dark-haired, a lightning scar still raw and livid across his forehead, his small hands loose at his sides, sleeping the deep, absolute sleep of infants who have survived something they will not remember. Neville Longbottom, rounder-faced, pale, clutching in one fist a small creststone from the Longbottom family vault, something Dumbledore had collected that evening on instinct. Some sense that the boy should arrive with something of his own. It glowed faintly. Green, pulsing. The color of things growing in dark places. As Dumbledore watched, a hairline crack ran through the stone, slow and deliberate, the way old things release what they have been holding. He placed the letter between the 2 baskets where it would be impossible to miss. He straightened. He did not linger. Whatever he felt standing on that doorstep in the cold, he kept it contained and carried it away with him when he left. His footsteps made no sound on the path. The street returned to silence. The cat on the garden wall watched him go. Petunia Dursley opened the front door at 6 minutes past midnight because she could not sleep and had decided that warm milk was the only solution, and that she needed to check the front step for the morning delivery schedule she'd left out. She found the baskets. She stood in the doorway in her dressing gown and her hair in curlers, and her hands still on the latch. And she looked at the 2 infants on her doorstep for 4 full seconds without expression. Then she picked up the letter. She read it once, her lips pressed thin. She read it twice, the way she read anything she was looking for a flaw in. She turned it over and found the Gringotts seal. Not magical, not theatrical, simply the pressed emblem of an institution she had never dealt with but understood completely. Because Gringotts was a bank, and banks meant legal standing, and legal standing meant consequences. She looked at Harry's face. She looked for a long moment. Her expression did not change, but something behind it did. Some small, old, buried thing that had Lily Evans written through it like lettering through rock. She looked at Neville. He was cold. His little hands were blue at the fingertips. She picked them both up, one in each arm, with the awkward efficiency of someone who has never held an infant in her life, but will not, under any circumstances, drop one. She backed through the doorway. She closed the door behind her with her heel. She did not call for Vernon. She went directly to the spare bedroom, laid them both on the bed, pulled the extra blanket from the cupboard shelf, and sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark. She sat there for a long time. Vernon found her at 6:30, still in her dressing gown. He stood in the doorway. He looked at the infants. He looked at his wife. He drew breath and began the sentence that would define the worst of him, the sentence that started with Petunia in a particular tone. The tone that meant this is not something I will tolerate, and ended, as these sentences always did, with an instruction about what was not going to happen in his house. The room went cold. Not dramatically. Not with any sound or flash or visible sign. The temperature dropped 12 degrees in 3 seconds, beginning precisely at the point where Vernon Dursley stood and radiating outward from the bed like a held breath being released. His own breath misted. The words stopped in his throat. His hand, which had been rising slightly, the way his hands rose when he was working up to something, went still. Harry and Neville were asleep. Neither had moved. But somewhere between one moment and the next, their hands had found each other across the gap in the bedding. Small fingers, loosely interlaced. And above that small joined space, the air shimmered once, the way summer air moves above hot pavement, and was still. Vernon stepped back. He did not decide to step back. His body simply did it, the way a hand pulls from a hot surface before the mind has named what happened. Petunia lifted her cup of tea. She had made tea at some point. She sipped it. "Their names are Harry and Neville," she said. "We'll discuss the arrangements at breakfast." Vernon sat down. He did not bring this up again for 11 years in any way that mattered. The sign language started as a game. Harry was 2.5 when he discovered that touching his fingers to Neville's palm and moving them in a specific pattern made Neville laugh. Not the startled laugh of a baby surprised by a sound, but the focused, delighted laugh of recognition. I know what that means. They were sitting in the back garden in the summer heat, too young for words to feel reliable, and the hands were faster anyway. More precise. Words could be overheard through kitchen windows. Hands held low between two small bodies in a garden belonged only to them. By 3 they had 40 signs. By 4, 120. Nobody taught them. Nobody knew. In the evenings, in the room they shared, they practiced. Harry could make a light appear at the tip of his finger. Small, steady, warm, not flame, not quite, but its own thing. He'd first done it at 3.5, reaching in the dark for Neville's hand during a thunderstorm, and the light had simply appeared because he needed it to. By 6, he could hold it for 4 minutes without losing focus. Neville concentrated on the houseplant on the windowsill. He would sit very still with his fingertips resting on the soil of the pot, and the plant would grow. Not explosively. Slowly and deliberately, the way time-lapse photography shows things moving that normally appear still. A stem extending. A leaf unfolding. Once, in autumn, the plant flowered 3 weeks out of season because Neville had spent an afternoon with both hands in the pot and his eyes closed, not quite thinking about anything specific. They coordinated. Harry lit, Neville grew. The plant reached toward the light with something that was not quite instinct and not quite intelligence, but lived in the space between. They thought all children could do this. Nobody had told them otherwise. Vernon Dursley bellowed at the boys exactly once. He was working up to something. A Tuesday, both boys 4 years old. A broken ornament from the hallway table that had been Vernon's mother's, and that Dudley had knocked off that morning, and that Vernon had, through some mechanism of selective blindness, decided the other two boys were responsible for. He came in from the hallway. He opened his mouth. The kitchen light bulb blew out. Not flickered, blew with a sharp pop, leaving the room in flat gray light. In the sudden dimness, Vernon's face, mid-shout, looked briefly ridiculous even to himself. He closed his mouth. He went and found a replacement bulb. By the time he'd changed it and come back, the moment had passed, and he couldn't locate the thread of it. Harry was sitting at the table reading a picture book about naval battles. Neville was looking out the back window at the garden. Neither of them had moved. Vernon began to suspect, around this time, that there was something wrong with his grip on the situation. He blamed stress. He blamed the commute. He did not examine the suspicion further, because examining it would require naming what he was afraid of, and he had long since chosen the comfort of not knowing. Dudley Dursley was built, by age 5, for the specific work of casual cruelty. He broke Neville's toy rabbit on a Tuesday, not in anger, but with the particular deliberate attention of a boy discovering what he had power over. He looked at Neville's face while he did it. That evening at dinner, Harry told Petunia about the rabbit. Not as a complaint, as a report. He described the toy, the breakage, the sequence of events, and then, with the careful, flat precision of someone reciting observations, he described Dudley's expression while it happened. He did not editorialize. He did not ask for anything. Petunia set down her fork. She looked at Dudley for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face confirmed what Harry had said. She corrected the situation, quietly and completely, in terms that made Dudley go very still and not look at anyone for the rest of the meal. Dudley did not stop entirely. But he developed, over the following months, a growing unease around the two boys that he had no language for. They always seemed to know what he was about to do, not in a way he could point to. Just when he was building toward something, one of them would be watching already. Calmly, without accusation. Just watching, the way you'd watch a weather pattern you had already correctly predicted 3 times. It was profoundly unnerving. He redirected his cruelty to school, where the audience was more satisfying. The single moment that ended it permanently came when they were 7. Dinner, a broken plate, Dudley's fault, unambiguously, witnessed by everyone at the table, and Vernon, who had been wound tight all week, erupted, not at Dudley. He turned the full volume of his frustration toward the two boys, in the specific way of men who have learned which targets feel safe. He rose from his chair. He was very loud. His face went the color it went when he was past the point of performance and into something else. The kitchen window blew out, outward, cleanly, as if something inside the house had exhaled once, with great force and complete precision. The glass landed in the garden in several large pieces, none of them inward, none of them dangerous. Vernon's plate, full, untouched, tipped directly into his lap. Hot gravy. He made a sound unlike anything that had come from him before and retreated to the bathroom. Harry and Neville had not moved. Harry's expression was the expression of a child trying to locate the source of a sound he wasn't sure he'd heard. Neville was looking at the empty window frame with the focused, slightly distant attention he gave to things he found interesting and wanted to understand better. Petunia looked at them both. She looked at the window. She looked at her hands on the table. "Finish your dinner," she said. They did. Vernon never raised his voice at them again. He told himself it was a decision he'd made. It had nothing to do with anything else. On Saturday mornings, Petunia dropped them at the Little Winging Public Library at 9 and collected them at noon. This began as convenience. It became, without anyone intending it, the most significant regular event of their childhoods. The library was run by a woman named Mrs. Albright, who had been a librarian for 31 years, and who recognized, within 2 weeks, that these 2 small boys were working through her shelves with a systematic thoroughness she had never encountered in anyone under 40. She stopped asking if they needed help finding things. She started leaving relevant books on the table she'd understood was theirs. Harry read military histories, biographies of medieval commanders, illustrated encyclopedias of British naval battles, and everything in the non-fiction section he could reach. He found, in a quiet corner, on a wet afternoon, a book called How Governments Work that had been shelved incorrectly in the children's section, and read it completely before anyone noticed it was there. Neville memorized the taxonomy of every flowering plant native to Britain. He cross-referenced growth conditions, traditional medicinal applications, and soil composition responses across 4 separate reference books, noted the contradictions, and reached several conclusions that 2 of the books had failed to reach. He did not know this was unusual. He also knew, without being able to explain it, that the oak tree in the library's back garden was dying from something in the soil. He knew it the way he knew when a headache was coming, from somewhere below conscious thought. He told Mrs. Albright she had the soil tested. He was correct. That late summer, a large black dog began appearing in the shadow of the fence post at the far end of the garden. It had been there 2 weeks before either of them mentioned it out loud. They were eating breakfast outside, the kitchen felt too small for the 3 of them and Dudley, and it was simply there, watching, with eyes that were, for a dog, extremely focused. Both boys had privately concluded it was the finest dog they had ever seen. It listened to everything. They left the gate open one morning. The dog came through. It sat between them and received, with great dignity, alternating pieces of Neville's toast crust. It came back that evening, and the one after that, until it was simply part of the garden the way the rose bush was part of the garden. On a Tuesday morning, it wasn't a dog anymore. The transformation was not slow or dramatic, simply a dog, and then, between one breath and the next, a man. Tall, sharp-featured, with the kind of face that had been very handsome once and was still striking in the way that weather-damaged things are striking. Long hair that needed cutting. Robes that were clean with the particular cleanliness of careful maintenance rather than abundance. He was sitting cross-legged in the garden where the dog had been, a piece of Neville's toast still in his hand, and his eyes were very bright and his hands were shaking. He looked at Harry. He opened his mouth. "You're Padfoot," Harry said. "Yes, and you're a person. Also yes. Are you hungry?" Neville said. "There's more toast." The man, Sirius Black, though they didn't know that yet, looked at Neville Longbottom for a long moment with an expression neither boy had seen on an adult face before. Like someone recognizing something they had given up expecting to find. His jaw tightened. He looked down at the toast in his hand. "I'm Sirius," he said. "I was your father's best friend." He looked at Harry. "I'm your godfather. I've been looking for you for a very long time." Harry was 8 years old and had been raised in a house where adults did not say true things directly, where information arrived in fragments and implications and things left significantly unsaid. He recognized, immediately and without analysis, that this man was telling him the truth in the way that people rarely did. The whole truth offered plainly, without preamble. He did not know what to do with it. "Tell me about him," Harry said. Sirius told him. For 40 minutes, sitting in the back garden with 2 boys eating breakfast on either side of him, he told Harry about James Potter. Not the portrait version, not the legend. The man. The specific way he laughed. The hexes he was most proud of. The animagus transformation and what it cost and why he did it anyway. The particular combination of arrogance and loyalty that made him, depending on the day, the most infuriating or most valuable person in any room. When he finished, Neville said, "Did you know my parents too?" Sirius went very still. "Frank Longbottom," he said, "was the bravest man I ever served with." He paused. "And I am going to tell you everything about him." He did. Every detail he carried. The way Frank moved through a room, the particular quality of Alice's laugh, the night Sirius had last worked alongside them both, and the specific things they had said that he had never been able to stop hearing since. He did not soften any of it. He gave it to Neville straight, the way Frank would have wanted, and Neville sat with both hands flat on his knees and listened with the focused stillness of someone filing away everything they have been given. Petunia agreed to the arrangement in the way she agreed to all necessary things, without warmth, without ceremony, and with complete reliability. The man was tutoring the boys. He came in the afternoons. He was, she told Vernon, a friend of the family handling some educational matters, and Vernon, who had developed, over 8 years, a sophisticated habit of not asking questions about things connected to the boys, accepted this without discussion. Sirius Black, sleeping in a bedsit 2 streets over, spent his mornings planning what he should have been teaching them for the last 8 years. He asked them, on the second afternoon, what they already knew. They told him. It took 20 minutes, with the particular overlapping efficiency of 2 people who had divided the same territory between them so long they no longer tracked where one ended and the other began. Harry covered the history, the military campaigns, the governmental structures, the pattern recognition he'd developed from years of watching adults make predictable decisions under pressure. Neville covered the natural world, the taxonomy, the soil compositions, the way things grew and why, and the fact that he'd known the oak tree in the library garden was dying before anyone else had noticed. He mentioned the sparks and the plant growth without apparent awareness that these were remarkable. Harry described the kitchen window with the factual calm of someone reporting a weather event. Sirius listened to all of it without speaking. His expression moved through several things. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Right," he said. "I have a great deal of catching up to do." He began that afternoon and did not stop for 3 years. By the time the summer ended, they could read a social situation like a weather map, knew the foundational principles of magical law, and understood the full history of the war that had made them. The following Saturday, Harry and Neville arrived at the library at 9 and found someone at their table. She was approximately their age, possibly slightly older. She had an extraordinary quantity of bushy brown hair and the expression of someone who had been interrupted 3/4 of the way through a thought and was deciding, with visible deliberation, whether the interruption merited engagement. She had 11 books opened simultaneously across the table's surface, arranged in a pattern that was not random. Between the books, a notepad. The notation system covering it was not any system either of them had seen before, not the standard library reference format, not anything from any of the books they'd read. It was faster than those systems. Denser. Harry looked at it for a moment. "That's not a standard annotation system," he said. The girl looked up. She assessed them both in approximately 4 seconds, the kind of assessment that takes in a great deal of information and processes it quickly enough that the subject doesn't notice it happening. "No, it's mine," she said. "I developed it for cross-referencing multi-source research. The standard system requires 6 additional steps and doesn't account for contradictory source material." She paused. "Are you going to stand there?" Harry and Neville looked at each other. "She's interesting," Harry signed, low and one-handed. "I was going to say that," Neville signed back. "I'm Harry. This is Neville. We've been using this table for 2 years. Hermione Granger." She moved 2 of her books precisely 4 inches to the left, creating a defined space at the table's corner. "I've been using it for 3 months. Shall we share it?" They shared it. By noon they had established the following. Hermione was 8 years old, 9 in September, currently working through an astronomy text because the children's section had taken 3 months and she'd run out of it. She had read the naval history book Harry considered his. She had found 2 factual errors in it, which she had noted in pencil in the margin because she believed in source correction even on library books. Harry checked the margins. She was right on both counts. He told her so. "I know," she said. Neville showed her his taxonomy notes. She examined them for 6 minutes, asking precise questions. Then she said, "You've missed 3 species in the subcategory for chalk grassland plants. Do you want me to mark them?" He did. She did. At noon, Petunia appeared at the library door. Hermione began packing her books with the particular efficiency of someone who has packed books many times. "Same table? Next Saturday?" Harry said. Hermione looked at him, then at Neville, then back at Harry. "Yes," she said. "I'll have finished the astronomy section by then. We can move to geology." She left. The door swung closed. "She's the first person I've met who reads faster than you," Neville said. "She reads faster than both of us combined," Harry said. That afternoon, Sirius met her in the back garden. He had arrived early and was sitting on the fence eating an apple when Harry and Neville came through the gate with an 8-year-old girl who immediately identified the book tucked under Sirius's arm as a first edition of Practical Defensive Magic and its use against the dark arts, and asked, with polite directness, where he'd obtained it. Because the standard edition had 3 chapters that contradicted each other on the subject of shield charms, and she wanted to see whether the first edition contained the same error or whether it had been introduced in revision. Sirius stared at her for a moment. "It's in the original," he said. "Then, the error is intentional. That's more interesting." She sat down at the garden table, produced her notepad, and looked at Sirius with the expression of someone ready to receive information. Harry and Neville said, "You're teaching them. What's the curriculum?" Sirius looked at Harry. "She asked me on the walk back," Harry said. "I told her there was one." "It's incomplete," Sirius said. He was not sure why he was explaining himself to an 8-year-old. He did it anyway. "The theoretical framework is solid, but the practical application is improvised. I didn't have access to formal materials until recently." Hermione wrote something in her notepad. "I can help with the theoretical structure," she said. "I'll have a reading list to you by next Saturday." Sirius Black, who had taught himself everything he knew through practice and instinct and access to the Black family library, looked at this 8-year-old child with her notepad and her cross-referencing system and her complete unconscious certainty that she could improve whatever was in front of her. He looked away. He finished his apple. "Fine," he said. Vernon came into the garden at 4:30 to object to the unauthorized assembly on his property. Sirius turned to face him. Vernon opened his mouth. He took in the full picture of Sirius Black, the height, the particular quality of stillness, the expression of a man who found Vernon Dursley genuinely, mildly interesting in the way one finds an unfamiliar insect interesting. "Mr. Dursley, lovely garden," Sirius said pleasantly. "The rose bush is particularly fine." He glanced at Neville. "Your boys are exceptional, by the way. You should be proud." He turned back to the table. Vernon stood in the garden for 4 seconds. Then he went inside. He poured himself a scotch. He did not look at the clock. At the garden table, Hermione was explaining the gaps in Sirius's curriculum without looking up from her notes. Neville was listening with his chin in his hand. Harry was reading over her shoulder and occasionally correcting her handwriting, which she was writing too fast for legibility. She allowed this. Petunia, watching from the kitchen window, set a fresh pot of tea on the garden table without being asked. She went back inside and said nothing. She would not say anything about any of it for 3 years, and when she finally did it, would be to Sirius, quietly, to tell him that whatever he was doing with the boys was working, and she thought he should know. She never said it was good. She said it was working. For Petunia Dursley, this was the same thing. Sirius had spent 3 years preparing them for exactly this. They dressed in the Dursley hallway before dawn on the day of their Gringotts appointment. Harry's robes were deep charcoal, the Potter crest at the breast, a stag, clean-lined, old. Neville's were forest green, the Longbottom Creston oak growing from a flat stone, roots visible beneath. Hermione's were midnight blue, no crest, and she wore them with the particular straightness of someone who understood that posture was its own argument. Sirius stood at the end of the hallway and looked at the 3 of them for a moment without speaking. "You know what you're doing," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Harry said. Sirius could not go to the bank with them. His legal standing, the gray zone the ministry had never formally resolved, made a public appearance with two children the wizarding world did not yet know existed tactically unsound. He stood at the entrance to Diagon Alley and watched them go. At the edge of the crowd, Harry turned back and raised one hand, fingers moving. "We've got this," he signed. Sirius nodded once. His jaw was tight. He held something very carefully in place. He did not quite succeed. But Harry had already turned and did not see. Diagon Alley was loud and entirely unprepared for them. They walked it the way Sirius had taught them to walk any unfamiliar territory, with attention, without hurry, registering exits and social hierarchies, and the particular geography of a place that had not changed significantly in 200 years. Hermione had read the briefing document she'd prepared twice on the way and did not need to consult it. She walked slightly to Harry's left, her eyes moving across the street with the systematic attention of someone conducting a survey. Neville was watching the plants in the shop windows. A devil's snare cutting in the apothecary display was reaching, very slightly, toward the glass on his side as they passed. He touched two fingers briefly to the window. The plant stilled. "Later," he said, to no one in particular, Gringotts had been notified. A goblin senior account manager, not a teller, not a junior clerk. The senior account manager materialized from behind the main counter the moment Harry and Neville crossed the threshold. He led them directly toward the formal account chambers without them approaching, without them waiting. The lobby watched. At the far teller window, Lucius Malfoy had his hand on Draco's shoulder and was conducting what appeared to be a routine transaction. He was not watching the entrance. Then he was. The shift was small, a slight turn of the head, a stillness replacing the usual fluid social performance, but it was complete. He watched two boys his son's age being led through Gringotts with a deference the goblins had not shown him in 20 years of significant deposits. Draco turned to look. His father's hand tightened briefly on his shoulder. The formal account chamber was cool and deep, cut from stone that had not seen daylight since the bank's founding. The walls were undecorated. The table was iron. Ragnarok, director of Gringotts, was already there. Old in the way that stone is old, not decayed but compressed, everything unnecessary worn away until only the essential remained. He watched them enter with eyes that had been conducting this kind of assessment for longer than anyone alive. Harry met his eyes. He did not look away. The Potter House stone was brought first. Black granite, roughly fist-sized, carved with the stag sigil. Harry placed his right hand flat against it. The stone lit, not dramatically, simply warm beneath his palm, and the light that came from it was the specific amber of very old magic, recognizing something it had been waiting for. It held for 3 seconds. Then, it was stone again. Neville placed his hand on the Longbottom house stone, gray-green, rough-surfaced, already warm before he touched it. The air in the chamber changed, not temperature, but register. The specific quality shifting the way it shifts in old forests after rain. Something released into it that had been held under pressure for a long time. The stone recognized him for 5 full seconds. When it finished, the room still carried the ghost of it. Ragnarok bowed, not the shallow professional nod he gave to wealthy clients. At the waist, the formal goblin recognition of a completed lordship claim. Ragnarok looked at his account manager and said something in gobbledygook, brief and flat. Then Hermione set her documentation on the table. 6 months earlier, she had sent a formal letter to Gringotts in impeccable legal form, requesting an independently commissioned genealogical audit of the Dagworth Granger lineage. Hector Dagworth Granger, founder of the most extraordinary society of potioneers, a branch of whose family had drifted into the non-magical world 2 generations back, without anyone thinking to record why. The audit had taken 4 months and 41 pages. She placed them on the iron table. The crystalline sphere was brought out and placed before her. She picked it up. It bloomed, every color simultaneously, moving through the sphere's interior the way light moves through cut glass, not mixing, remaining distinct, each one complete. It lasted longer than either lordship claiming. When it finished, Hermione set the sphere down carefully and folded her hands on the table. Ragnarok said something to his account manager. The closest translation, rendered approximately, "Well, that's less of a surprise than it should be." Lucius Malfoy entered the formal chamber on a pretext. He was very good at pretexts. His expression was perfectly arranged, polite interest, the easy authority of a man who owns significant portions of the world he moved through. He addressed Harry directly, by first name only, the specific condescension of a senior noble acknowledging a junior one who had not yet been formally received into the social architecture that mattered. Harry turned from the table. He looked at Lucius Malfoy with the particular quality of attention he brought to things he had already read extensively about, and was now verifying against the primary source. Then he said, "Lord Malfoy, House Potter recognizes you." A beat. "We haven't been formally introduced. I'm Lord Potter." He gestured left. "Lord Longbottom." He gestured right. "And our sovereign sage." Hermione did not look up from returning her documentation to her bag. "I believe you knew our parents. We'd like to discuss that properly someday." He turned back to the iron table. "But we have business to complete. I'm sure you understand." Lucius Malfoy was at the chamber exit before he had consciously decided to move. He stood in the corridor outside for 3 seconds, his cane in his hand, his expression doing something it was not accustomed to doing in professional settings. Through the chamber's glass panel, Draco watched from the lobby. He watched Harry turn back to the goblins. He watched the goblin director say something to Harry with the focused attention of a man receiving a worthy interlocutor, Ragnarok, who had never once acknowledged Draco's existence during any Malfoy visit. Draco's expression settled into something it would carry for years. Complicated, involuntary, not quite what he would have chosen to feel, if feeling were something he'd been taught to choose. Ollivander's was last. When Harry picked up the 11-inch holly and phoenix feather wand, the shop went bright, every wand on every shelf trembling once in their boxes, a single sustained resonance like a struck bell finding its frequency. Ollivander stood very still. "Curious," he said. "Very curious." He paused. "The phoenix who gave this feather gave only one other." "I know," Harry said. Ollivander looked at him. "Yes," he said quietly, "I expect you do." Neville's wand had been on the shelf for years. Cherrywood and unicorn hair. It had been waiting. When Neville picked it up, it did not perform. It simply fit, with the completeness of something returning to where it belonged. Ollivander ran his thumb along the grain of the wood and said nothing for a moment. "This one has been patient," he said finally. Hermione's vine wood and dragon heartstring trembled in her hand like a compass needle finding north. Then it went still. Ollivander looked at all 3 of them standing in his shop in their house robes with their new wands. "Remarkable," he said. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Outside, Diagon Alley moved around them, unaware of what had just shifted inside the white marble building at the top of the street. Harry looked at Neville. Neville looked at Harry. Somewhere behind them, in the Gringotts lobby, the word was already moving, the particular speed of information in a small world. By morning, the wizarding world would know the Potter and Longbottom seats were no longer empty. They walked into the afternoon and did not look back. The Hogwarts Express was red and real and loud, and it moved through them like a physical thing. The smell of coal smoke, the noise of hundreds of students, the particular chaotic energy of a 1st of September that had been anticipated for months and had finally arrived. Draco Malfoy came to the compartment door 20 minutes outside London. He had prepared for this. It was visible in the particular ease of his entrance, the practiced tilt of his chin, the body language of someone conferring a social favor. He offered his hand and his name, and the information that he could help Harry navigate the wizarding world, phrased with the fluency of someone who had been taught that positioning generosity as superiority was a foundational social skill. Harry listened to all of it with the quality, when he listened, of someone giving a speaker their full attention, not performance, actual attention, which was in some ways more disconcerting than dismissal because it left nowhere to hide. "I appreciate the offer," Harry said when Draco finished, "but we know the school's layout. I've had the plans since August." "A beat. Your father seemed surprised to meet us at Gringotts. We hope there are no hard feelings. We know he had complicated dealings with our parents." Draco left the compartment. He walked back down the corridor with his face carefully arranged and his hands loose at his sides, recalibrating a plan whose foundational assumption had just been removed. He did not fully understand what had happened. He understood that he hadn't won. These were, he was beginning to suspect, not the same thing. Ron Weasley knocked an hour later and asked if there was room. He was tall and red-haired and slightly too long for his robes in the way of someone who had grown fast and recently. And he had the quality of someone who was genuinely curious rather than performing curiosity, which was rarer than it should have been. He looked at the three of them, at the house robes, the rings, the particular atmosphere of a space occupied by people who had arrived prepared, and said, without apparent self-consciousness, "You're them, aren't you? The Duel Lords." "We don't call it that," Harry said. "Everyone else does." Ron sat down. He looked at Hermione. "And you're the one who sent the letter to Gringotts when you were 8. I was almost 9, Hermione said. "Right." He pulled a paper bag from his pocket and offered it around. Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, half empty. "I'm Ron Weasley. My mum's been following the Gringotts thing since August. She made my dad explain it 3 times. He paused. "Do I have to bow or anything?" "No," Neville said. "Good. That would have been awful." He offered the bag to Neville. "Which house do you think you'll get?" They talked for the rest of the journey. Ron was funny in the way of someone who had grown up surrounded by people and learned to find the gap in any conversation where a well-placed observation would land. He talked about his brothers with the affectionate exasperation of long familiarity, about the burrow, about his mother's cooking with the specific reverence of someone who knew what it meant to have enough. He did not treat them differently once the formalities were established. Harry noted this. It was the correct response. The Great Hall was exactly as described in every account Harry had read, and still more than the accounts had contained. The floating candles, the enchanted ceiling showing a clear September night, the 4 long tables filling with students in black robes. The Trinity walked in the same formation they always walked, Harry slightly forward, Neville to his left, Hermione to his right. Not planned, not performed. The product of years of shared movement. The staff table watched them enter. Dumbledore, at the center, went very slightly still. The twinkle Harry had read about in 3 separate accounts was present and then, for a moment, was not. Snape looked at Harry with an expression of prepared dislike, old, specific, a decade of anticipation sharpened to a point. He looked at Neville and the dislike became something more complicated. He looked at Hermione's documentation folder, which she was carrying under one arm, and his expression went briefly neutral in the way of someone encountering a variable they had not accounted for. McGonagall looked at the 3 of them and did rapid arithmetic. Her mouth was in its usual thin line, but at the corners, very slightly, it was doing something else. The sorting hat was older than it looked. Harry sat on the stool. McGonagall lowered the hat onto his head. The hat went quiet in the way it went quiet before something it needed to think about. Then, In the register it used for announcements rather than private conversation, it said, "One soul in two bodies." I haven't felt this since the founders. The great hall went completely silent. Sovereignty. There was no house called sovereignty. There had never been a house called sovereignty. The word landed in the great hall and sat there without context, without precedent, without any framework in which it made sense. Neville sat. The hat touched his head and said, without hesitation, sovereignty. What happened next had not happened in 1,000 years of Hogwarts sortings. The hat invoked the contingency the four founders had built into its mandate. The provision for students whose magical signature could not be accommodated within the existing four-house structure, never triggered because no one had ever qualified. A fifth table materialized between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. Plain oak, undecorated, long enough for three. It appeared with the solidity of something that had simply not been needed until now. Hermione sat. The hat considered for 4 seconds. Sovereignty, she walked to the table, sat down, opened her notepad. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy stared at the fifth table with the expression he had been developing since August, the one he had no name for. At the staff table, Dumbledore had removed his spectacles and was cleaning them with the particular focus of a man who needed something to do with his hands. McGonagall looked at the fifth table, at the 3 children sitting at it, with the settled composure of people gracefully absorbing an outcome they had not precisely predicted, and her mouth did the thing at its corners again. She called the next name on her list. The sorting continued. The oak table remained. It would remain for the next 7 years. Snape had been teaching for 10 years. He had developed a classroom methodology of considerable precision, a specific pedagogical pressure designed to produce results through discomfort. It required, as its foundational condition, that students cared what he thought of them. He understood this on the 3rd week of term, looking up from his desk at the beginning of the Friday potions session to find the Trinity already seated, already reading, already open to the correct page without being instructed to. Not performing readiness, simply ready. He recognized, with the instinct of someone who had been assessing students for a decade, that these 3 had not spent a single moment since entering his classroom wondering whether he approved of them. He filed this information. He began the lesson. The Bezoar question came 20 minutes in. It was the same question he asked every year. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Because it was not in the first-year curriculum. Because it required either exceptional preparation or exceptional prior knowledge. And because the correct answer produced a specific social dynamic in the classroom that served several subsequent purposes. He looked at Harry. The draught of living death, Harry said. Asphodel belongs to the lily family. The name references the fields of the dead in Greek tradition, which is where the drought's name originates. Wormwood's primary magical property is its capacity to suspend biological function without ending it, which is why the combination produces a sleep indistinguishable from death rather than simply a sleeping drought. He paused. The Bezoar is a stone from a goat's stomach. It neutralizes most poisons, and aconite, wolfsbane, is one of the few poisons it won't fully counter, which is relevant to the 1742 St. Mungo's case, where 3 patients were treated incorrectly and the Bezoar was blamed rather than the dosage error. He looked at Snape. Did you want the full St. Mungo's case summary or just the antidote distinction? The classroom was very quiet. The distinction will suffice, Snape said. He moved on. He did not call on Harry again that lesson. 3 weeks later he tried Neville on the preparation of shrinking solution, the consequence of adding the caterpillar before the Shrivelfig had been properly stewed. Neville answered correctly. Then he added, without being asked, that the timing error produced a potion that shrunk the subject's nervous system rather than their body, which was why a potions incident at Durmstrang had resulted in the casualties it had. The brewer had confused the stewing stage with the steeping stage, a distinction most introductory texts failed to adequately emphasize. "Where did you read about that incident?" Snape said. "My godfather's library," Neville said. He had a first edition of Mortlake's Potions Disasters of the Northern Schools. The Durmstrang chapter was annotated by the original investigator. Snape was quiet for 2 seconds. This was, for Snape, a significant pause. The annotation author was Damocles Belby. His conclusion about the stewing stage was subsequently disputed. "By 2 papers," Neville said, "both retracted. The retraction notices are in the appendix of the 2nd edition, which my godfather also has." Snape turned back to the board. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was looking at Neville with an expression he was not bothering to conceal, because he had not yet decided what it meant, and therefore could not decide whether to conceal it. The cure for boils was assigned on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of October. Standard first-year work. Snape announced, in the tone he used for statements he expected to be received as challenges, that any student producing a completely silent, non-verbal brew would receive additional marks. He said it because it was impossible. First-year students had not developed the magical control required for silent casting in any context, let alone in potions. He said it to demonstrate the gap. Harry and Neville looked at each other. "Shall we?" Harry signed, low and one-handed below the table. "Why not?" Neville signed back. They cast in silence. Harry directed the heat with the focused magical attention he had been developing since he was 5 in a back garden, calibrating the flame temperature with a precision no first year should have possessed. Neville worked the ingredients, his earth casting reaching into the plant components of the brew, accelerating their active compound release with the same focus he used to encourage a rose to turn in fading light. The potion changed color, pale green to yellow to the specific orange of a correctly brewed cure for boils. The standard time for this transition was 35 minutes into a 65-minute brew. It took 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Then it continued to develop. Past the standard orange into a deeper shade, a secondary reaction the standard recipe did not produce, because the standard recipe did not account for Harry's precise temperature calibration or Neville's accelerated compound release. The additional property was olfactorily distinct. Snape could smell it from across the room. He was at their station. He had not decided to walk there. He was simply there, looking at a perfect cure for boils produced in 4 minutes and 20 seconds by non-verbal casting in a first-year potions class, with a secondary medicinal property the standard curriculum recipe had never produced. He looked at the potion. He looked at Harry. He looked at Neville. "Adequate," he said. He walked to the other side of the room. The classroom did not breathe for approximately 4 seconds after he left the station. The summons to his office came 2 days later, phrased with the particular precision of someone who had decided in advance how the conversation would go. Harry brought Hermione's brief. She had written it in 2 hours the previous evening, after they'd discussed the likely follow-up and identified unsanctioned magical cooperation as Snape's most probable line of challenge. 3 paragraphs, formally structured, citing a Hogwarts Board of Governors ruling from 1837, which established that ancient house magic, including cooperative casting techniques transmitted through blood right and formal tutorship, could not be restricted in the classroom without violating the Ancient House Education Compact. The compact predated the Ministry of Magic. It had never been repealed because no one had needed it in 200 years, and therefore no one had remembered to. Snape read it. He stood behind his desk in the cold green light of his office and read it in full. His expression did not change. He read it twice. Then he set it on his desk and looked at Harry. Harry met his eyes. He was not challenging. He was not performing anything. He simply looked back at Snape with the patient attention of someone who had already read the end of this particular exchange and was waiting, with genuine courtesy, for the other party to reach it. "You may go," Snape said. Harry took the brief from the desk and left. In the corridor outside, Neville was waiting. Hermione had her notepad out. She looked up. "Well?" she said. "He read it twice," Harry said. Hermione wrote something down. "Good. That means he's looking for a counter-argument. If he'd dismissed it, he would have read it once." "Is there a counter-argument?" Neville asked. "No," Hermione said. She capped her pen. "I checked." Behind them in the dungeon, Snape stood at his office window for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man conducting an internal revision he had not anticipated needing. He had taught for 10 years. He had never needed to read a student's legal brief. He picked up the parchment. He read it a third time. He set it down and went back to his marking. He did not find the counter-argument, because there was not one to find, and Hermione Granger had known this before she wrote the first word. Neville felt it on a Wednesday afternoon in the third week of October, working the castle's geography the way Sirius had taught them. Walking the corridors with deliberate attention, building a three-dimensional map from primary observation rather than second-hand description. Harry was tracking the castle's magical register. Hermione had the architectural plans she'd sourced before term and was annotating discrepancies in the stonework. Neville had been touching the walls. Not every wall. Specific walls, at specific intervals, with the flat-palmed contact he'd been using since he was 5 in the back garden. The same attention he gave to soil, to root systems, to the geological memory that stone accumulated over centuries of magical saturation. Hogwarts was the richest environment he had ever encountered. Every corridor had layers. Every foundation told a different story. He had been listening to it the way a musician listens to an unfamiliar piece, following the structure, waiting for the anomaly. The third-floor corridor gave it to him on the fourth pass. He stopped. He placed both palms flat on the floor and went very still for approximately 30 seconds. "Something is under here," he said. "Not just the dog." Harry stopped beside him. "How far down?" 3 layers, maybe 4. Neville kept his hands on the stone. "The dog is the first layer. Below that there's a large drop. Then 2 more layers of something constructed. And at the bottom," he paused. "Something very old is being held very still. It's warm. It doesn't belong in stone." Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione already had her notepad out. The Sovereign's search took place that evening in the Sovereignty dormitory, a small tower room the castle had produced on the second day of term. 3 beds, 3 desks, 1 large window facing north. No portraits. The goblins had sent 3 runic privacy seals by post in the first week, and Hermione had inscribed them on the door within the hour. Harry provided the penetrating force, his will casting directed downward through the castle's stone. Neville provided the anchor, both hands flat on the dormitory floor, his earth sense extending through the castle's foundations like a root system reaching for water. Hermione sat between them with her notepad and her 3-color annotation system, interpreting what came back. It took 40 minutes. When it was finished, her diagram covered 4 pages. She set it on the desk, and they looked at it together. 1 3-headed dog. A trapdoor. Devil's Snare. Neville made a small note beside this entry in his own handwriting. "Will respond to me. Not a problem." A chamber of flying keys. A life-size enchanted chess set. A troll, currently unconscious, which suggested the corridor's protections had already been tested by someone who hadn't reached the end. A final obstacle involving a mirror and old intention-based magic. And at the bottom, below all of it, an object of condensed magical density, unlike anything the scan had returned from anywhere else in the castle. Warm, golden, radiating a preservation magic so ancient that Hermione sat back and looked at the ceiling before she wrote its identification. "The Philosopher's Stone," she said. "Nicholas Flamel's." Confirmed as real in 3 separate Goblin Treasury records, I read the summaries when I was researching the genealogical audit process. Dumbledore has hidden the Philosopher's Stone in a school full of children, Harry said. The outer protections are actually well designed, Hermione said. Most of them. The Devil's Snare is the third layer, Neville said. If someone got past the dog and the trapdoor without knowing about Devil's Snare, they'd be dead, Harry said. Or they'd have been taught by Sprout, Neville said. Which is worse, strategically, because Sprout teaches everyone. Hermione closed her notepad. We're going to Dumbledore. The note arrived at the headmaster's office by internal post the following morning. The response came at noon. 7 o'clock. Lemon drop. Dumbledore's office was circular and warm and full of the particular atmosphere of a space that had accumulated significance over decades. Fawkes regarded the three children from his perch with the amber attention of a creature that had been in this room long enough to have opinions about what entered it. Dumbledore sat behind his desk arranged in the mode of patient, grandfatherly attention, the half-moon spectacles, the expression of benevolent curiosity. The lemon drop dish pushed slightly forward. It was a configuration designed to establish a specific relational dynamic, wise elder, uncertain young. Harry set Hermione's diagram on the desk and turned it to face Dumbledore without preamble. We conducted a sovereign search of the castle's foundation layers, Harry said. This is what we found. Dumbledore looked at the diagram for a long time. His expression did not change in any visible way. But the lemon drop dish did not move again. How did you? He began. Sovereign search, Harry said. We've been practicing since we were 9. A pause. I was not aware you had been trained. Our godfather was thorough, Neville said. Dumbledore removed his spectacles and looked at the diagram without them, which was either a sign of needing clearer vision or of needing something to do. He replaced them. What would you like me to do? He said. The question cost him something. It was visible in the precise, deliberate way he asked it, the way a man asks a question whose answer he has already determined he will accept, because the alternative is a conversation he is not equipped to win. Move the stone to Gringotts, Harry said. Their security is demonstrably superior to what's currently in place. We've already spoken with Ragnarok. He's willing to receive it this weekend. Dumbledore was very still. You've spoken with the Goblin Director. We had tea last month, Hermione said. She had not looked up from her notepad, where she was adding a supplementary annotation to the diagram's 5th page. He sends his regards. The fire in the grate crackled once. Fawkes made a low sound, not quite musical. Dumbledore looked at 3 first-year students sitting in his office with the relaxed certainty of people who had prepared for this meeting more thoroughly than he had, which was not a position he had occupied in a very long time. He looked at the diagram. He looked at the note from Ragnarok that Hermione had produced from her folder. 3 sentences. The Goblin Director's seal at the bottom, confirming his readiness to receive the stone under full Treasury-level protection. I will arrange the transfer by Sunday, Dumbledore said. Thank you, Harry said. They stood to leave. At the door, Hermione turned back. The troll in the 5th chamber, she said. It's been there since at least September. The stone memory around it is quite clear on the timeline. Someone tested the corridor before we did. You may want to determine who. She closed the door. The stone was moved on Sunday. Ragnarok sent confirmation by owl Monday morning, a single line in gobbledygook that Hermione had learned to read in August, which translated approximately as, received, secured, the Treasury ward is active. Do not concern yourself further. She pinned it to the Sovereignty dormitory notice board. Quirinus Quirrell returned to the 3rd-floor corridor on a Wednesday night. He opened the door. He found the corridor empty. The dog was gone. The trapdoor was sealed from below, cold and inert in the way of things sealed, not by a lock, but by the absence of what they were built to guard. He stood in the empty corridor for a long time. Then he walked back to his classroom and sat at his desk and stared at the wall, and the thing sharing his body with him was so still and so cold that Quirrell's hands shook for the rest of the evening without stopping. 3 weeks later, Harry brought the case to Dumbledore. He had been tracking Quirrell's patterns since October. The flinching, the absences, the particular cold that preceded him into rooms. Neville had felt it in the castle's stone, a wrongness that moved through the corridors and disappeared into the defense classroom. Hermione had assembled the documentation, 14 pages, a theoretical framework drawn from 3 pre-ministry texts on spirit-anchored possession. A recommendation that the situation be resolved before the Christmas holiday. Aurors arrived before the end of term. Quirrell was removed from the school. The school record noted, Professor Q. Quirrell retired due to health concerns. Defense against the dark arts position to be filled for the spring term. Nobody nearly died in a dungeon. Harry wrote to Sirius that evening, a single line in their own shorthand. The kind of letter that looked like nothing to anyone who opened it without the context of years of shared language. First one handled. No casualties. Stone secure. Quirrell resolved. Sirius's reply arrived the next morning, equally brief. Good, get some sleep. Well done. Harry folded the letter and put it in his trunk. He slept 9 hours, the deep, uncomplicated sleep of someone who had prepared for something, done it, and finished it completely. The second year opened quietly and changed fast. Neville felt it on a Tuesday morning in October, crossing the second-floor corridor before breakfast on his way to an early session with Professor Sprout. He stopped. He placed his hand on the stone floor and crouched there, very still. Something enormous was moving through the pipes beneath the castle. Not water. The movement of water through pipes had a specific register, consistent and directional. This was different. The slow, deliberate displacement of something vast and muscular. Something whose weight pressed against the surrounding stone the way a river presses against its banks. It moved with the patience of something that had been moving through the same channels for a very long time. And underneath the movement, threaded through it like a secondary current. Pain. Not acute pain. The old, deep pain of something that has been held in the wrong shape for so long that the wrong shape has become the only shape it knows. Neville stayed crouched on the corridor floor for a full minute. Then he went to the greenhouse, completed his session with Sprout, ate breakfast, and told Harry and Hermione at the sovereignty table, with great matter-of-factness, that there was something enormous in the pipes, and it was suffering. Hermione opened her notepad. Describe the movement pattern. He described it. She wrote. Harry watched her face as she wrote, and saw the moment she arrived at the conclusion. Basilisk, she said. Harry's Parseltongue surfaced the same week. A garden snake had gotten into Greenhouse 3 through a crack in the foundation, small and brown, and cornered by a second-year Hufflepuff attempting to remove it with a trowel. Harry reached past her, picked it up, and said, without thinking, "Be still. No one will hurt you." The snake went still. The Hufflepuff stared. Harry looked at the snake in his hand and then at the Hufflepuff and understood, from her expression, that what he had just said had not arrived as English. He brought the snake outside, released it into the grass, and told Neville and Hermione at the first available moment. Hermione had the relevant texts by the following morning, 3 from the restricted section, including a pre-ministry text on magical inheritance that addressed serpent speech as a transmissible gift rather than a fixed bloodline trait. She read all 3 by the afternoon and annotated the contradictions between them. It came from Voldemort, she said, over dinner. The night he attacked you. The soul fragment transferred it. Which means it might not be permanent, Harry said. Which means we don't know yet, Hermione said. But it's useful now. Specifically for this. She tapped her notepad, where the basilisk research had expanded across 12 pages. The petrifications began in November. Mrs. Norris first, found rigid in a corridor below a message written in what appeared to be paint and was not. Then Colin Creevey, his camera still in his hand, eyes fixed and glassy. Then Justin Finch, Fletchley, and nearly headless Nick together. and the detail about Nick told them something specific. Nick, as a ghost, could not be fully petrified. Something had hit him at an angle, reflected, imprecise. "She's not doing this cleanly," Neville said. "She's being directed by something that doesn't understand her properly." Harry noticed Ginny first, the particular gradual wrongness of someone being drained rather than ill. He told Neville. Neville felt it too, standing near her in the corridor, the same cold register he associated with things that didn't belong. They brought it to Hermione, who ran the runic read in the library on a Tuesday, and confirmed it within the hour. A black diary. Old magic on a new object. Dark magic, specifically, the result had been unambiguous. "We need to handle this in the right order," Hermione said that evening in the dormitory. "The diary is directing the basilisk. But the basilisk is being compelled by something older than the diary, something built into the chamber itself. If we take the diary first without addressing the chamber, the compulsion remains. If we go to the chamber first without dealing with the diary, Riddle still has a hold on Ginny." "We go down," Harry said, "both at once. We take the diary with us." Hermione nodded. It was the correct call and she had reached the same conclusion, but it was his to make, and he had made it. The Chamber of Secrets opened with a word. Harry stood at the sink in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, Myrtle herself submerged and sulking after Hermione had asked her, with characteristic directness, for a factual account of the last time anyone had opened the entrance, and spoke to the snake carved into the tap's base in the language that still felt strange in his mouth, foreign and familiar at the same time, like a memory of something he hadn't experienced. The entrance opened. Cold air, old stone, the smell of deep water. They descended together. The chamber was vast in the way of things built by someone who wanted to be remembered as vast. Serpent columns. Green-lit darkness. Stone that had not seen light in decades and remembered decades before that with equal indifference. Their footsteps were very small in it. Neville knelt immediately, both palms on the chamber floor. He stayed there for a long time, longer than the castle corridors required, because this stone was older than anything above it, and the compulsion woven into it was deep and layered, and had been here so long it had become structural, load-bearing, as fundamental to the chamber as the columns. He said, quietly, "She's at the far end. She knows we're here." "Is she going to move?" Harry asked. "Not yet. She's waiting." Neville kept his hands on the stone. "She's been waiting for a very long time." The basilisk came out of the darkness the way glaciers move, with a scale and deliberateness that made speed irrelevant. 12 meters of ancient serpent, green-black in the chamber's light, her eyes closed. Neville had told her, through the stone before they descended, keep them closed. She had listened. This was the first time in 900 years she had been asked rather than commanded. "We are not here to harm you," Harry said, in Parseltongue. She stopped. The chamber was absolutely still. "Others have said this," she said. Her voice in Parseltongue was very old, not slow, but weighted, each word carrying the accumulated mass of centuries. They said it and then gave commands. "I am going to give you something different," Harry said. "My friend behind me, the one with his hands on the floor, he can feel what was done to you. The compulsion. He can reach it. Nothing can reach it. It is in the stone." "So is he," Harry said. Neville worked without speaking. He had both palms flat on the chamber floor and every part of his attention directed downward, past the surface stone, past the foundation layer, into the deep stratum where the compulsion had been set like a cornerstone. It was old magic. Older than anything he had encountered. Not a spell in the conventional sense, but an intention pressed into stone with sufficient force and repetition that the stone had absorbed it, made it structural. He did not try to break it. Breaking it would require matching Slytherin's power directly, which was not something he was prepared to do, and which was not in any case how earth magic worked. He went underneath it. Earth magic addressed living stone the way water addresses rock, not by force but by finding the path of least resistance. The microscopic channels, the fault lines. The compulsion had been set in the stone, but it had not grown with the stone. It was fixed. The stone around it had continued its slow geological life for 1,000 years, and the compulsion, rigid, unchanging, had been left slightly proud of its surroundings, like a nail in old wood that hasn't moved while everything around it has. Neville found the fault line. He pressed. The compulsion crumbled. Not explosively, it dissolved at its edges first, the way old mortar dissolves before the stone it held. The basilisk made a sound that the chamber's acoustics amplified into something vast and formless. Not a roar, not a scream, but the sound of something releasing a breath it had been holding for 1,000 years. She swayed. Harry stood directly in front of her and did not move. "Is it gone?" she asked. "Yes," Harry said. A long silence. The chamber's darkness pressed in around them. Then the basilisk lowered her head, slowly, deliberately, until it rested on the chamber floor 3 meters from Harry's feet, and the stone beneath her accepted her weight with a quality that Neville felt as recognition. "My name," she said. "I have not had one." Harry looked at Neville. Neville looked up from the floor. Hermione was already writing. "In our language, we would call you Deep," Harry said carefully. The basilisk was still for a long moment. "Deep," she said. Yes, Tom Riddle's shade manifested from the diary, while the 3 of them were still in the chamber. Not from nowhere, from the black diary in Hermione's bag, which had been pulsing with increasing intensity since they descended, its soul fragment feeling the compulsion's dissolution and pushing against whatever boundaries remained. The shade rose at the far end of the chamber, translucent, 16 years old, already certain of his own significance. He began a speech. It concerned power, and inevitability, and the legacy of Salazar Slytherin. Neville found it first, his earth sense moving across the chamber floor, locating the single fang Deep had shed during her release, curved and dark against the stone. He picked it up without standing and held it out. Hermione crossed the chamber in 4 steps, took the fang, drew the diary from her bag, and drove it through. Riddle dissolved mid-sentence. The chamber was quiet. "The dark things," Deep said from the floor. "I have felt them in the stone for years. The cold ones. I can tell you where they are." Hermione's pen was already moving. The Dementors stopped the Hogwarts Express somewhere in the Midlands. The cold arrived before they did, working through the carriage walls the way cold works through old stone, finding every gap, every imperfection. The lights went out, the windows frosted from the inside, precise crystalline patterns spreading across the glass in the dark. Harry felt it first. Not the cold. The cold was secondary, but the quality of stillness that preceded it, the specific register of something very large and very old removing warmth from the air, not as a byproduct, but as a function. He had 2 seconds of recognition before the compartment door opened. He cast. The Patronus left his wand fully formed, not the wisp of silver vapor that first attempts produced, but a stag, complete, antlered, moving through the compartment with the purposeful weight of something that had been waiting to exist. It hit the Dementor at the door, with the force of a memory of Lily Potter standing between her child and death, and the Dementor retreated. Beside him, Neville cast. The oak tree that emerged from Neville's wand grew outward from the wand tip with the slow inevitability of actual growth. Roots spreading across the compartment floor, trunk rising to the ceiling, branches pushing through the Dementor's presence at the window and dividing it the way tree roots divide stone. The Dementor withdrew. Hermione cast. Her otter emerged sleek and luminous from the wand tip, not large but utterly precise, moving through the air with the fluid, relentless momentum of something completely at home in any environment it chose. It hit the Dementor in the corridor with the warm solidity of a creature that had never in its existence been cold, and drove it back the length of the carriage without breaking stride. 3 seconds. 3 Patronuses. The train moved again. Ron Weasley, who had been in the compartment when it happened and had pressed himself against the window with his hands white-knuckled on the seat, said, You did that from memory. The full form. First try. 4th try, Harry said. We've been practicing since we were 9. Ron looked at the stag, which was still present and unhurried, moving through the compartment's restored light. What's the memory? He asked. Then, sorry, you don't have to, my mother, Harry said. The exact moment she decided. Ron said nothing. He looked at the stag for a moment longer. Then he nodded once. The specific nod of someone who understands something they cannot fully articulate, and turned to look out the window at the moving countryside. Sirius was not in Azkaban. This was the fact the Ministry had chosen to describe as an escape, because the alternative, acknowledging that he had been imprisoned without trial, that the procedural failures ran deep enough to constitute systemic negligence, that Peter Pettigrew was alive, was not a narrative that served anyone currently in office. He had been living in the gray zone for years, technically a fugitive under Ministry law, publicly described in terms that required no one to look too closely at the mechanism. He had been circling the edges of their lives as Padfoot, waiting for the right conditions, and the right conditions were now. Harry had been building toward this since second year. The venue, the timing, the witness list. The specific pressure point that would make Fudge attend rather than deflect. The case had 3 components: a truth resonance ritual, drawn from pre-ministry magical law, requiring a truthful statement to resonate at a frequency detectable by multiple witnesses simultaneously, Pettigrew's exposure and identification, and a venue large enough and public enough that the Ministry could not manage the aftermath quietly. Harry chose the Great Hall. Hermione built the legal architecture around what he brought her, and spent the autumn term making it airtight. The invitation letters went out in the first week of November, written on Sovereignty stationery, formally addressed, delivered simultaneously to the Minister for Magic, 17 Wizengamot members, 4 members of the Wizarding Press, including, specifically, the editor of the Quibbler, whose commitment to printing things other outlets refused had been noted and valued, and Albus Dumbledore, who received his copy with an expression of careful neutrality and replied within the hour that he would make the Great Hall available on the stated date. Fudge's reply came 2 days later. It was phrased as a gracious acceptance of an invitation he had every reason to decline and could not, because the letter had been copied to too many people, and declining would require him to explain why, publicly, to the same people. The letter's key sentence, written by Hermione and reviewed by Harry for tone, Lord Potter and Lord Longbottom would appreciate the minister's personal witness to a matter of historical justice, particularly given the ministry's foundational role in the original arrangement. The word arrangement had been chosen with surgical care. It implied knowledge. It implied documentation. It implied that declining the invitation would confirm the implication. Fudge came. Scabbers was identified on the morning of the demonstration. Hermione had asked Ron, privately, the evening before, to bring the rat to the Great Hall. Ron looked at her for a moment. He had known Hermione for 2 years. He had watched her work. "It's Scabbers, isn't it?" he said. "That's what this is about." "Yes," Hermione said. Ron was quiet. Scabbers had been Percy's before him, had been in the family for 12 years. Ron looked at the rat in his pocket, its yellow teeth and missing toe and the extraordinary age of it, and Hermione watched him arrive at the conclusion she had arrived at in their first year together. "All right," he said. "Yeah, all right." He brought Scabbers. The Great Hall held 500 people on a November morning. Every student, every staff member, the minister and his aide, 17 Wizengamot observers, 4 press representatives, and Sirius Black, who entered through the main doors in formal robes that Hermione had sourced weeks earlier, clean-lined and dark, the black family crest at the breast. Walking with the particular quality of a man who has been moving through the world in a legal gray zone for years and has decided this morning to stop. He saw Harry first. Harry was standing at the sovereignty table. He met Sirius's eyes and signed, one-handed, small, "We have it." Sirius nodded. His jaw was tight. He took his position at the front of the hall. The truth resonance ritual required 3 anchor points, Harry, Neville, and Hermione, positioned at the hall's vertices. The resonance field established between them, visible to every person present as a faint luminescence in the air. Not dramatic, simply present, the way important things are present. Sirius made his statements. 3 of them, spoken clearly into the resonance field. I did not betray James and Lily Potter. The resonance field turned gold. Held, every person in the Great Hall saw it. Peter Pettigrew is alive. Gold again. Sustained, several people in the Wizengamote section looked at each other. I was imprisoned without trial. Gold. The field held for 5 full seconds, longer than the others, as though the magic itself required more time to process the weight of the statement's implications. In the silence that followed, Hermione said, "Lord Potter." Harry cast the identification ritual, the forced transformation sequence he had learned from a pre-ministry text on animagus legal accountability, requiring 3 months of preparation and the runic configuration Hermione had inscribed on the Great Hall floor before dawn. The rat in Ron's hands convulsed, grew, became a man. Peter Pettigrew, bald and pale and missing a finger on his right hand, stood in the Great Hall in front of 500 witnesses and the Minister for Magic and looked at Sirius Black. He started crying immediately. The oars were there in 30 seconds. They had been positioned outside the hall since early morning, Hermione's arrangement, confirmed through the DM-lay contact she had been cultivating since 2nd year. A quiet correspondence with Amelia Bones that had begun with a formally written letter about procedural irregularities in historical Azkaban admissions and had developed over 18 months into something that looked very much like a working relationship. Pettigrew was taken without incident. He did not stop crying. Sirius walked out of Hogwarts into November light. He stopped on the steps. He tilted his face up. The sky was very clear, the specific blue of late autumn, hard-edged, cold and clean. He stood in it for a long moment. His hands were shaking. Harry came out behind him. Then Neville. Then Hermione, who was already making notes about the follow-up documentation that would need to be filed with the Wizengamot. Harry stood beside Sirius and did not mention the shaking, which was the correct thing to do, and Sirius understood that it was correct, and that Harry had known it would be. "Are you all right?" Harry asked. Sirius made a sound, not a laugh, not quite. Something that had been compressed for 12 years releasing through a gap too small for it. "I'm going to be," he said. Harry had identified the injustice 2 years earlier, had seen it in the voting records, in the margins that should not have been margins. Neville had confirmed it through the Longbottom seat documentation, the paper trail of a name used without permission for 13 years. They brought it to Hermione, and Hermione had done what Hermione did, built the case that could not be argued with. Not continuously. There were interruptions, school terms, the ongoing Horcrux intelligence from deep, but the petition existed as a persistent project. Every ministry overreach filed, every abused procedure given a page, a date, a citation. A cross-reference to the relevant statute it violated. She gave Harry and Neville the final draft on a Sunday afternoon in the Sovereignty dormitory. She sat on the edge of her desk while they read it. She had her notepad open, but she was not writing. She was watching their faces move through the document, tracking which sections made Harry's jaw tighten and which made Neville go very still. When they finished, Harry set it on the desk. He looked at the cover page. How long have the Potter and Longbottom seats been managed under the stewardship framework? He asked. Since the night Dumbledore placed you at Privet Drive, Hermione said. The ministry moved within 72 hours. It's in the procedural record. I found it in the Wizengamot archive 2 years ago, filed under administrative maintenance of abeyance estates. The language is very careful. Nobody who didn't know what they were looking for would find it. But you found it, Neville said. I knew what I was looking for, Hermione said. Harry looked at the document again. 13 years. The political weight of 2 ancient houses, absorbed into the ministry's voting apparatus through a legal fiction so carefully maintained that it had become invisible. Every decision Fudge's administration had forced through the Wizengamot with a narrow margin, the margins that shouldn't have been narrow, the margins that would have failed outright if the Potter and Longbottom seats had been occupied by their rightful holders. File it Monday, Harry said. I've already arranged the courier, Hermione said. The petition arrived at the Chief Warlock's office on Monday morning, delivered by Gringotts' legal representative, not Ministry Owl, not Standard Post, Goblin Courier, which had its own legal standing under the Goblin Sovereignty Accords and could not be intercepted, delayed, or quietly redirected by anyone in the ministry's administrative structure. Simultaneously, copies were distributed to every sitting Wizengamot member by the same mechanism. Fudge received his copy that morning, read the summary page, and called Umbridge. There was no counter-argument. Hermione had checked. The emergency session convened on Thursday. Harry and Neville wore their formal house robes. Hermione wore the Dagworth Granger acknowledgement robes, midnight blue, the sage-blood crystalline pattern worked into the cuffs and silver thread, formal enough that 3 Wizengamot members visibly recalibrated their assumptions when she walked in. She carried the petition in a leather folio, organized by section, with color-coded tabs that corresponded to the evidence appendices in the secondary folder under her arm. The chamber filled around them as they settled into the Potter and Longbottom seats, seats that had been occupied by ministry, appointed stewards for 13 years, and that now, with Harry and Neville in them, looked exactly as they had been designed to look. Complete. Several members who had been attending sessions for decades noticed this without being able to articulate why. Lucius Malfoy was in his seat across the chamber. He watched Harry sit down with the expression of a man conducting a rapid and entirely private strategic reassessment. He arranged his face into its professional configuration and said nothing. The session lasted 4 hours. The petition's 17 violations were presented section by section, without theatrics. Harry presented the broad framework. Neville handled the specific instances that involved Longbottom seat votes. Hermione presented the legal argument, standing at the chamber's address point with her folio open, working through the statutory citations with the focused efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this exact sequence for 2 years. When members cited precedents she had already accounted for, she indicated the relevant appendix section number without breaking her delivery. Fudge sat in the minister's observation chair above the chamber floor and sweated through his robes. Umbridge, in the aides' gallery, had not moved in 90 minutes. Her face was the face of someone identifying exactly which of the 17 violations was most legally catastrophic for her specifically. She found it in violation 9, 3 ministry appointments she had made across 2 departments that exceeded her formal authority by a margin she had apparently believed was too small to notice. Hermione had noticed. The appendix was thorough. The votes were called individually. Violations 1 through 5. Stewardship Framework Dissolution. 31 votes for, 12 against, 7 abstentions. The framework was dissolved. The Potter and Longbottom seats were formally, legally, permanently restored. Violations 6 through 10. Umbridge's unauthorized appointments. The chamber voted formal censure on 3 of the 5. Violations 11 through 17. Fudge administration procedural irregularities. The chamber voted a formal Wizengamot caution, the procedural equivalent of a final warning, requiring a written acknowledgement from the minister and triggering a mandatory external audit of the administration's financial records. The financial audit was Hermione's specific addition, Included in the petition's fourth draft after a conversation with Sirius about the mechanics of how Fudge had maintained his political position for so long. Follow the money, Sirius had said, from the specific knowledge of someone who had grown up in a family that understood how power actually functioned. There's always money. The motion for the audit passed by 23 votes to 19. The chamber cleared slowly, with the particular quality of people who need to process before they can move efficiently. Fudge descended from the observation chair and moved through the chamber with the trajectory of someone heading for the exit and hoping to arrive before anyone intercepted him. Harry stood. "Minister," he said, at the volume of a person addressing a room in which every other conversation had paused. Fudge stopped. The chamber was quiet. 41 voting members. The press gallery. Lucius Malfoy, still in his seat, watching with the focused stillness of a man deciding which version of this moment was least damaging to his current position. Harry looked at Cornelius Fudge across the chamber floor. "The Wizengamot has noted your cooperation today," Harry said. "Lord Longbottom and I want to be clear. We consider this matter closed, not resolved. You may expect us at every session from this point forward." "With our sovereign sage," Neville said. He glanced at Hermione. She was reviewing the session record, her pen moving. She looked up at the precise moment Neville looked at her, the practiced timing of two people who had been reading each other's peripheral attention for years. She looked at Fudge. "I'll send the agenda for the upcoming term by Friday, Minister," she said. "We have several additional matters to bring forward." Fudge opened his mouth. The chamber was watching him. The press gallery was watching him. Lucius Malfoy was watching him with the expression of a man calculating how quickly he could adjust his public position relative to the ministers. Fudge closed his mouth. He nodded once. He left. Sirius was waiting in the corridor outside the chamber. He had not been permitted to attend. His formal Wizengamot restoration was a separate process, still underway, and appearing in the chamber gallery before it was finalized would have given Fudge's team a procedural lever they didn't need to hand them. He had waited in the corridor with a copy of the petition he'd already read 3 times, and a coffee that had gone cold before the first vote was called. He stood up when the doors opened. He looked at the 3 of them, at Harry and Neville still in their formal robes, at Hermione with her folio under her arm and her pen still in her hand, and said nothing for a moment. "Well?" he said. "Stewardship dissolved," Harry said. "Seats restored." Umbridge censured on 3 counts. Fudge cautioned and under financial audit. Sirius absorbed this. The audit was Hermione's. "Yes," Harry said. Sirius looked at Hermione. She was reviewing her notes and did not look up. "You taught us to follow the money," she said. "I followed it." Sirius made a sound. He looked at the ceiling of the ministry corridor for a moment, at nothing in particular. Then he looked at Harry. And the thing in his face was not pride exactly. Pride was too simple for what had just happened, but something that had no cleaner name. The feeling of a man watching something he helped build stand under its own weight for the first time. "Your father," Sirius said, "would have absolutely no idea what to say right now." "Would that be unusual?" Neville asked. Completely, he always had something to say. Sirius picked up his cold coffee. "Come on, I'm buying dinner. Somewhere that isn't the ministry." They walked down the corridor together, and the chamber behind them held the record of what had happened, and the record would stand. And no one who had been in that room would describe the afternoon as anything other than the day the Ministry of Magic learned what it meant to have 2 empty seats, filled by the people who were supposed to be in them. Deep told them about the ring first. It was a Tuesday. Harry sitting cross-legged on the chamber floor with his back against one of the serpent columns and a piece of parchment on his knee. The sessions had become regular, twice a month, sometimes more, always after curfew. Deep communicated in the measured, ancient parcel tongue of something that had been thinking in long time scales, long before anyone alive was born. She described the ring in geological terms: a cold thing, wrong cold, sitting in soil above a specific stratum of limestone that she had felt through the pipe network for 60 years. Little Hangleton, a ruined cottage. The ring was on the floor of a room that had been closed for decades, and the wrongness of it had been seeping into the surrounding earth the way contamination seeps, slowly. Irrevocably, Harry wrote down everything. Neville ran the runic read from Deep's coordinates the following week, standing in the Hogwarts grounds with his palms on the grass and his earth sense extended to its limit, 200 miles north of Little Hangleton, feeling the cold wrongness of it the way you feel a splinter through the sole of a shoe. "There's a trap on it," Neville said. Layered old magic and dark magic together, the trap is designed to activate on contact with magic directed at the ring. If someone reaches for it with a spell, the curse fires. So we don't reach for it with a spell, Hermione said. They went on a Saturday, all three of them, Sirius positioned 200 meters out with a portkey and standing instructions not to come in unless he heard the signal. The gaunt shack was exactly what Deep had described: collapsed, abandoned, saturated with decades of magical neglect, and something darker underneath that made the air above the threshold feel wrong the way bad meat smells wrong before you can articulate why. Neville went in first. He crossed the threshold, knelt immediately, both palms on the rotten floorboards, and stayed very still. Harry watched from the doorway. Hermione was beside him with her notepad, her eyes moving between Neville and the room's interior. "There," Neville said. He tilted his head slightly, the way he tilted it when he was listening to something below the audible range. "The trap is keyed to magical contact, but the ring itself isn't anchored to the structure. It's just resting there." "Can you reach it without magical contact?" Harry asked. Neville reached into his jacket pocket and produced a pair of dragonhide gloves. Hermione had sourced them weeks ago, researched their specific resistance properties, confirmed they would block the passive dark magic emanation without triggering the contact curse. He put them on. He crossed the room on his hands and knees, moving slowly, feeling the floor ahead of him the way you feel ice before trusting your weight to it. He found the ring, picked it up. The trap did not fire. He stood and held the ring out, gloved hands steady. Gold and black, a stone set in the band, the resurrection stone, the Deathly Hallows symbol engraved on its face. And inside it, the cold knock Harry had developed the sensitivity to identify in his sleep. A Horcrux, old and dense and furious in the particular way of things that have been sealed for decades. Harry put the ring in the lead-lined box they had brought for it. He closed the lid. He latched it. They walked out into the afternoon, and Sirius materialized from behind a hedgerow and looked at the box in Harry's hands and said, "Clean?" "Clean," Harry said. They destroyed it that evening in the Sovereignty dormitory. It took 3 attempts and left Harry with a headache that lasted 2 days. Hermione documented the rune sequence. Neville made tea. The locket came from Grimmauld Place. Sirius found it in a glass cabinet on the 2nd floor, behind a collection of dark objects he had been methodically cataloging since his legal restoration gave him access to the house without complications. He recognized the wrongness of it immediately. The same cold knock Harry had described, the same sense of something sealed under pressure that had no business being sealed. He owled Harry a single line. "Found something. Come when you can." They came that weekend. Hermione confirmed it in 40 seconds. Slytherin's locket, the Horcrux they had been expecting since Deep first gave them the inventory. They destroyed it in the Grimmauld Place kitchen with the runic sequence Hermione had refined from the ring destruction, and this one fought harder. The locket generated voices before it went, low and specific and targeted, finding the precise frequency of each person's deepest uncertainty and broadcasting it into the room. It told Harry his parents had chosen to die rather than fight harder. It told Neville his parents were better off not remembering him. It told Hermione that everything she had built was performance, that nobody she loved would be there if she were ordinary. None of them stopped what they were doing. "It finds what you're afraid of," Hermione said when it was done. Her voice was exactly level. "That's the mechanism. It's not true. It's just the mechanism." "I know," Harry said. "I know," Neville said. Sirius looked at the destroyed locket on the kitchen table and then at the three of them and said nothing for a moment. "Your generation," he said finally, "is going to absolutely terrify people." "Good," Hermione said, and closed her notepad. The Hufflepuff cup came from Gringotts. This required the most complex arrangement of anything they had done: Ragnarok's cooperation. A formal Horcrux identification request filed through the Gringotts legal process, and a retrieval operation conducted entirely by Goblin security operatives, while Harry, Neville, and Hermione waited in the formal account chamber and received the destroyed cup in the lead-lined box 30 7 minutes later. Ragnarok set it on the iron table. "The vault tenant will be notified of a routine security inspection," he said. "The notification will be accurate. What was found in her vault has been addressed. What was found in her vault will not be discussed." "Thank you," Harry said. Ragnarok inclined his head by approximately 2 degrees. This was, for Ragnarok, effusive. The diadem came from the room of requirement. Neville found it by feel, walking the 7th-floor corridor with one hand on the wall, his earth sense extended into the castle's upper structure, feeling for the specific cold signature Deep had described as the thinking one, the one that wants to be found by the wrong people. He found the hidden door. Harry opened it. Hermione identified the diadem in 40 seconds from the Ravenclaw family records she had read 2 years earlier. The destruction took 1 attempt. The diadem fought differently from the others. It generated not illusions, but doubts, the specific targeted doubts of an object enchanted by someone who understood intelligence as a weapon. It whispered to Hermione that the rune sequence was wrong, that she had made an error in the 3rd stroke, that everything she had built was on a foundation that would not hold. She completed the sequence without pausing. When it was done, she sat back in her chair and looked at her own hands for a moment. 5, Harry said. "Nagini," Hermione said. "And you." Harry looked at her. She had known about the Scar Horcrux since 5th year, had found the theoretical framework in a pre-ministry text on unintentional soul anchoring, and brought it to Harry on a Tuesday evening, in the dormitory with the particular quality of someone delivering information they have verified 3 times because they needed to be certain before. They said it out loud. He had taken it the way he took most hard information, without drama, with the focused stillness of someone filing a new variable into an existing plan. "One problem at a time," he had said then. Nagini first, she had agreed. It was still true now. Voldemort returned between 5th and 6th year. Not through the Triwizard mechanism. The Trinity had identified Barty Crouch Jr. By October of 4th year, presented the evidence to Dumbledore by November. And the real Moody had been freed and Crouch contained before Christmas. The graveyard plot failed before it began. Voldemort, without his designed mechanism, used an improvised ritual, a willing follower, a cauldron, borrowed blood from a captive who was not Harry Potter. The body he returned to was weaker for it. The specific protection he had designed around Harry's blood was absent. And he knew it. And his intelligence network, what remained of it, after 3 years of systematic Horcrux loss that he couldn't fully explain and couldn't stop, reported that the Duel Lords were not frightened. He found this intolerable. Nagini was in Sussex. Deep had tracked her through the Serpent Network, the passive Parseltongue channel that Harry had learned to access in 5th year. A low-frequency communication that moved through every snake in Britain simultaneously. Deep monitored it. Nagini was large and old, and her presence in the network was distinctive, partly because of her size, and partly because of the Horcrux fragment inside her, which registered as wrongness in a network that was otherwise simply alive. They found the farmhouse on a Wednesday in the spring of 7th year. Sirius confirmed the outer ward structure from the road. Hermione designed the breach sequence. Harry and Neville went in alone, Sirius's standing instruction to wait outside held by the same logic it had always held. If they failed, someone had to continue. Nagini was coiled in the main room, 12 feet of her, old and massive, her scales the dark green of deep water. She raised her head when they entered. "We are not here to harm you," Harry said in Parseltongue. Nagini was still. "The Dark Lord has put a piece of his soul inside you," Harry said. "You did not choose this. We can remove it without hurting you." A long silence. The farmhouse settled around them, old wood and cold air. "How?" Nagini said. "Do you know what I chose?" "I don't," Harry said. "I'm asking." Another silence. Longer, Nagini lowered her head by 3 inches. "Not submission, consideration. Remove it," she said. "Then I will go." The ritual took 40 minutes. Hermione inscribed the runic array on the farmhouse floor with the focused speed of someone who had practiced this specific configuration 50 times. Neville maintained the anchor, both palms on the floor, his earth sense holding the spatial frame stable while Hermione worked, and Harry channeled the dissolution through the Parseltongue connection, using the language itself as a conduit. The soul fragment could not flee through a channel it hadn't created and didn't understand. It dissolved in 22 minutes. Nagini shuddered, her entire length, one long ripple from head to tail. Then she was still. Then she raised her head and looked at Harry with eyes that were, for the first time in her conscious memory, entirely her own. "It is gone," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "The voice, the one that was always there. Gone, yes." She moved past him toward the farmhouse door, unhurried, enormous. At the threshold she paused. "The one who put it there," she said. "He is coming." "I know," Harry said. "Good," Nagini said. She went through the door and into the darkness, and did not look back. The Scar Horcrux required something different. Hermione had been developing the extraction methodology for 2 years. The theoretical framework was in the pre-ministry text, Chapter 7, Deliberate Near Death, a conscious engagement with the death threshold close enough that the soul fragment lost its anchor, at which point the dissolution sequence could be applied. Not actual death. Proximity sufficient to make the fragment believe the host was no longer viable. Harry read the methodology. He read it twice. He said, "When?" "Before we face him," Hermione said. "The fragment gives him a connection to you. If it's still present during the confrontation, he'll be able to use it." "Where?" "Grimmauld Place. Sirius's ritual chamber. We'll need Lupin as backup." Harry nodded. He looked at the methodology document for a moment longer. Then he folded it and put it in his trunk, and did not mention it again until the morning they did it, because there was no productive use of the intervening time that involved thinking about it further. The extraction took 7 minutes and 30 seconds. His heart stopped for 28 of them. Neville was holding the runic grid over Harry's chest when it stopped, and he looked at Hermione across the stone table, and she said, with her voice entirely level, "Keep going." "It's working." She did not look up from the dissolution sequence. Her hands were steady. She completed the final rune stroke. The grid went dark. The cold presence in the scar, the thing that had been there since Harry was 15 months old, that he had never known as separate because it had never been absent, was gone. Sirius's emergency casting restarted Harry's heart on the 4th attempt. Harry opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling of the ritual chamber. Did it work? Hermione ran the confirmation sequence over his scar. The runes did not glow. 6, she said. Her voice was exactly the same as always. Her hands, when she set the grid down, were shaking very slightly. She folded them on the table in front of her and looked at them for a moment before she looked at Harry. "One to go," she said. Little Hangleton. November, the Riddle House. The Auror Corps arrived at dusk, 43 of them, Kingsley Shacklebolt commanding. The operational plan filed through the Wizengamot War Powers statute that Harry had introduced in September. The Death Eaters at the perimeter encountered a coordinated response they had not prepared for, because their intelligence had told them Harry Potter would come alone, or nearly alone, because that was what the prophecy implied, and the prophecy was the frame through which Voldemort understood everything. The prophecy had never named Neville. Voldemort's choice had made it Harry's, but Voldemort had never understood that the choosing cut both ways, that the boy he had not chosen had been marked by the choosing as surely as the boy he had, just differently, just in ways that had been 17 years in the making, rather than one terrible night. 3 Death Eaters surrendered before a spell was cast. The Wizengamot amnesty program, running since 4th year, had done its quiet work. The rest fought. Bellatrix Lestrange fought with the absolute, furious commitment of someone for whom this was not a battle, but an identity. Neville faced her in the Riddle House garden with the specific steadiness of someone who has rehearsed this encounter, not in anger but in preparation, who has not spent 15 years wanting this moment, but has spent 15 years making sure that when it came he would be equal to it. He was. The duel lasted 4 minutes. Bellatrix Lestrange, who had never in her life faced someone who could not be destabilized by cruelty, found at the end of 4 minutes that she had run out of options. She was alive when the Aurors reached her. She would not be comfortable. Voldemort was in the Riddle House garden. He had come outside because the house was being systematically cleared, and he had understood, in the last 10 minutes, that this was not a raid but a siege, and that the person commanding it had studied siege logic rather than duel logic, and that this was a distinction he had not prepared for. He was very powerful. He was mortal. He had been mortal since his return, without Harry's blood, and he had known it and fortified against it with the Horcruxes that were no longer there, and the followers who were no longer standing, and the strategic framework that had assumed a single chosen sacrifice walking into a designed trap. Harry and Neville came through the garden door together. Voldemort raised the Elder Wand. He cast. The wand shuddered in his grip as the curse left it, the physical sensation of something misaligned. The Elder Wand's allegiance shifted to Harry through the disarming of Draco Malfoy months earlier, the wand resisting the instruction to kill the man it had already chosen. The killing curse left the wand but wrong, thin and dispersed and half-blind, the green light fracturing rather than coalescing. Harry moved. Neville moved with him, the same direction, the same instant, the coordination of 2 people who have been moving in tandem since before they could walk. The curse passed between them. They cast simultaneously. Not the same spell, they had never needed to cast the same spell. Harry's will force drove outward. The Elder Fouthhark dissolution sequence spoken at full voice. Peverell blood behind it. Death threshold awareness behind that. The willing condition of the magic met by a person who had already crossed that threshold once and returned. Neville's earth force anchored the frame, pressed the dissolution into the ground beneath Voldemort's feet, rooted it. Made it structural rather than directional, impossible to sidestep because it came from below. Tom Riddle had no Horcruxes. He had no phylactery. He had a body built from an improvised ritual, and a soul that had been fragmenting for 50 years, and that now, under the combined weight of 2 equally marked wizards casting from a shared harmonic frequency, had nowhere left to go. His expression, at the end, was not fury. It was not defiance. It was the expression of someone who has spent 50 years refusing to walk through a door and has finally run out of reasons not to. He fell in the frost-covered garden of the Riddle House, and the night was very quiet, and the Elder Wand lay in the dead grass beside him, and Harry left it there. Sirius came through the garden gate. He looked at the garden. He looked at Harry and Neville, standing side by side in the November cold. "Are you both all right?" he said. "Yes," they said. His hands were shaking. He crossed the garden and stood between them and put one hand on each of their shoulders, and they stood there in the cold and the quiet while the oars secured the house behind them, and the war, which had been running in one form or another for 16 years, ended in a frost-covered garden without ceremony, without a chosen sacrifice, without a prophecy being fulfilled. Simply two boys who had been ready. The legislation took 18 months. The Heritage Theft Act, the Magical Equality Statute, 21-19, the closest of all of them. The Creature Rights Amendment with Remus Lupin's specific language on werewolf protections intact. The Educational Sovereignty Compact last, removing the mechanism that made another Umbridge possible. Kingsley Shacklebolt was elected minister. Harry had been supporting him since 5th year, not managing, supporting. Kingsley stood on his own. This was the point. Fudge retired. The financial audit published what Hermione had known it would find. He did not give a farewell address. Draco Malfoy, when he began his practice in private magical law, found that certain doors opened with less resistance than he had expected. The Shadow Academy was chartered several years later. Sirius ran it. The same curriculum he had been teaching informally for 16 years, now with licensing and a budget and Hermione's oversight. He taught the foundational occlumency course himself to every new cohort, every year. He believed the inner house was something you built best with a guide who had needed it most. He was extraordinary at it. Alice Longbottom had a good day. Neville was sitting with her in the Longbottom Manor garden when she turned and said his name. Not the uncertain repetition of something partially remembered, but the way she had said it before Bellatrix's curse had taken everything. Neville, complete, present, she held his hand. She looked at the garden. "You look like your father," she said. She remembered other things that afternoon, Frank's laugh, the color of the kitchen at the old manor, the way the ley line felt underfoot when the magic ran strong. She told him about them slowly. He listened. He did not rush her. She forgot again by evening. But the afternoon had happened, and it was recorded in the only place that mattered. Platform 9 3/4 was red and loud and full of the particular chaos of another September. Another cohort of 11-year-olds learning that the world was larger than they had understood. Neville stood on the platform with his hands in his coat pockets. Hannah stood beside him. Their daughter stood in front of him in her new school robes, 11 years old, with the quality of a child who has grown up in a household where the world was explained rather than managed, and who therefore meets new things with attention rather than anxiety. She looked up at him. "What if the hat puts me somewhere unexpected?" she asked. "Then you'll find out something true about yourself," Neville said. "That's what it's for." She thought about this. Uncle Harry said it might say sovereignty. It might. The hat has its own ideas. "Is that what it said to you?" Neville looked at the train, at Harry, 20 meters down the platform, watching his eldest board with the particular expression of a person feeling something they have no efficient language for. At Hermione beside Ron, her notepad, she had a notepad, she would always have a notepad, open to a page that she closed as she watched her own children disappear through the carriage door. At Sirius, standing at the platform entrance in a long coat with his hands in his pockets, watching all of them with the expression of a man who has been given back something he thought was gone and has never for one day taken it for granted. "Yes," Neville said. "That's what it said to me." "And was that good?" "Yes," he said. "It was good." His daughter looked at the train. She looked back at him. Then she squared her shoulders the way her father had squared his shoulders 36 years earlier in a corridor that smelled of old stone, and she picked up her trunk and she walked through the carriage door and was gone. Neville watched the door close. He watched the windows of the carriages fill with movement and faces, and the ordinary, extraordinary chaos of children beginning something they did not yet fully understand. Harry came to stand beside him. They stood the way they had always stood, shoulder to shoulder. The ease of two people who had been each other's steadiest constant for as long as either of them could remember. The train began to move. Slow at first, then gathering. The red engine pulling the long line of carriages down the track and around the curve until the platform held only steam and the smell of coal and the particular quality of a moment after something has departed. The platform emptied around them. Parents moving in groups, voices carrying, the ordinary ongoing noise of a world that had been broken once and had been rebuilt and was still, on balance, worth the rebuilding. Harry looked at the empty track. Neville looked at Harry. Harry raised one hand. His fingers moved. Same as always, he signed. It was what they signed at the end of every Shadow Academy session. The same closing. 36 years of it, give or take a few mornings in a back garden in Surrey, when they were still small enough that the language was still new and the world was still entirely ahead of them. Neville signed it back. They stood there until the steam cleared and the platform was quiet and the morning held nothing but itself. And then they turned, together, and walked toward the barrier, and went home. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.